They laughed when he arrived on the beach, holding what looked like a child's carnival prop. An oversized metal tube wrapped with hoses, valves, and a ridiculous little ignition wand that looked like it came straight from the back aisle of a toy store. Japanese officers even joked over intercepted chatter. Americans have brought playground weapons to a battlefield. That joke died fast, because the moment that nozzle screamed to life, the air itself seemed to ignite. In less than 3 seconds, a 30-foot jet of burning fuel, thick, sticky and hotter than 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, shot forward like a living dragon. Palm trees didn't burn, they evaporated. Sand didn't smoke, it turned black and glassy. Japanese bunkers, built with reinforced concrete and designed to withstand artillery barrages, didn't resist. They melted. Soldiers trapped inside didn't have time to scream. In 2 hours, one man and one toy store flamethrower erased 49 positions that engineers once claimed were impossible to breach, and nobody was laughing anymore. Before we go any deeper into how a single flamethrower operator turned fortified Japanese strongholds into smoking craters, I need something from you. Tell me where you're watching this from. Are you somewhere in Texas sipping coffee while imagining this battlefield? Maybe you're in New York, California, Florida, or stationed overseas on a military base. Drop your city in the comments right now. Seriously, I read every single one, and it blows my mind to see how far these stories travel. And while you're down there, hit that like button if this opening already hit harder than a Sherman tank kicking its engine to life. It tells the algorithm you're not here for bedtime stories. You're here for history with teeth. If you're not subscribed yet, fix that now. We've got stories of American ingenuity, battlefield terror, and war machines that rewrote the rules of combat. Strap in. What comes next is on another level entirely. Dawn had barely broken when the assault craft touched the shoreline of Peleliu. A jagged Pacific island, the Japanese had transformed into a labyrinth of bunkers, pillboxes, underground tunnels, and firing ports so tight a bullet could come at you from anywhere and nowhere at the same time. Marines called it the island that bites back, and they weren't exaggerating. Every ridge concealed a machine gun nest. Every cave hid men ready to die before surrendering. Artillery fire thundered over the beach like an angry god. The smell of cordite, salt, and fear clung to the humid air, and in the middle of that inferno stood Corporal Thomas Brill, barely 5'8", 148 pounds, carrying a weapon most soldiers wanted nothing to do with, the M2 flamethrower. The M2 wasn't elegant. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even considered a real weapon by many infantrymen. It was heavy, about 70 pounds when fully loaded, strapped to a soldier's back like an explosive metal coffin. The twin cylindrical tanks carried roughly 4 gallons of napalm-thickened gasoline, enough for just 8 to 10 bursts of fire totaling barely 30 seconds of actual flame. The ignition system, primitive, a spark plug, a battery, and a wand that looked like it belonged in a Halloween-haunted house. But what it lacked in style, it compensated with absolute psychological annihilation. Brill had spent months being mocked, while riflemen carried M1 Garands, semi-automatic legends firing 30-06 rounds at 2,800 feet per second. He lugged around what looked like plumbing equipment. Machine gunners walked with Browning 30 cals, capable of laying down sheets of lead. Brill carried a backpack that could explode if a single bullet punctured the tanks. He wasn't a marksman, he wasn't a sniper. He was the guy everyone hoped the enemy wouldn't notice because if they did, he was dead before he could pull the trigger. What the skeptics didn't understand was that Brill wasn't a regular operator. He was obsessed. While others trained to fire rifles standing, kneeling, or prone, Brill studied flames. He experimented with fuel mixtures to increase stickiness. He observed how napalm adhered to anything it touched: skin, concrete, steel. He measured how heat pooled inside bunkers, turning them into ovens. He mapped how sound echoed through caves, amplifying screams until men lost their sanity. He didn't carry a flamethrower. He wielded a tactical extinction device. By mid-morning, Japanese resistance intensified. Machine guns hammered from concrete nests embedded into coral formations, so thick 75mm shells sometimes bounced without making dents. Grenades rolled downhill like metallic hailstorms. A sniper round cracked inches from Brill's left ear. Marines dropped behind boulders and broken palm trunks, pinned by invisible enemies. The chain of command hesitated. Charging those front lines meant suicide. Flamethrowers were designed for situations like this, close-quarters hellscapes where fire, not bullets, won engagements. Brill stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't rally troops. He simply opened the fuel valve. A low hiss filled the air, almost gentle at first. Then, the roar. A pillar of flame erupted forward with such force the nozzle kicked like a captured dragon. The firejet reached nearly 45 meters, hotter than molten lava, moving so fast the air shimmered around it. The bunker ahead vanished behind orange fury. Inside, ammunition cooked off like popcorn. The roof cracked. Smoke billowed upward like a volcanic exhalation. When the flames died, nothing moved. The lines held still. Marines stared in disbelief. The bunker, once a fortress, was now a charred cavity. Brill turned, expression cold, as though he had merely lit a campfire. No celebration, no pride, just mission. That was bunker number 1. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 2 hours he would erase 48 more, each faster, each more terrifying than the last, and transform a battlefield everyone expected to drag for weeks into ash before lunchtime. The terrain ahead wasn't a battlefield. It was a death maze engineered by Japanese planners who believed no American would dare enter it. The unbreakable mountains, a twisted mass of coral ridges and razor-sharp rock, hid interlocking bunkers, connected by tunnels where defenders could vanish, reappear, and fire from angles no map could predict. Every approach was a choke point. Every shadow was a firing slit. Marines advancing into this nightmare felt as if the island itself wanted them dead. Even tanks struggled. The coral tore tracks like paper. Flamethrowers were supposed to be support weapons. On Peleliu, they became the only language the enemy understood. Brill pushed into the ridge with a 3-man escort, 1 ammo runner carrying spare fuel tanks weighing nearly 40 pounds each, 1 rifleman covering angles, and 1 demolitions man with satchel charges for whatever survived the inferno. The sun hammered down at nearly 105-degree Fahrenheit. Sweat soaked through uniforms instantly. The M2 tanks on Brill's back radiated heat that made it feel like the man himself was cooking alive. But he kept moving, eyes fixed, breath controlled, a predator searching for his next target. The second bunker came into view, camouflaged with palm leaves, its firing slit barely visible. Brill didn't hesitate. He sprinted, zigzagging, fuel tanks bouncing against his spine, rounds snapping past him. He slammed his back against the bunker wall, too close now for the defenders to angle their rifles. He pulled the safety lever, squeezed the trigger, and unleashed a short burst. Flame didn't just enter the bunker, it filled it. Napalm splashed against the ceiling, dripped downward, and pooled around ammunition crates. The fire clung like tar. Inside, the Japanese didn't burn, they dissolved in heat. A corporal watching nearby gagged as the bunker exhaled a sound no human should hear. 2 bunkers destroyed. The command radio crackled with reports Marines had never transmitted before. Flames clearing tunnels, defenders abandoning positions, enemy evacuating under fire. Something was happening that doctrine didn't account for. The Japanese soldiers weren't retreating from bullets. They were running from a weapon that denied them even the dignity of a warrior's death. Their defensive doctrine, fight to the last man, collapsed when the fire arrived. A bullet kills. A flame erases. Brill's team resupplied him in seconds. Tanks were swapped. Valves checked. Igniter tested. He moved again. Bunker 3 stood behind a coral split, protected by interlocking machine guns that had pinned Americans for 4 hours. A squad leader shook his head. "You can't get close. They've got the angle." Brill didn't respond. He simply sprinted directly into the kill zone. A round hit the rock inches from his head, another punched through his sleeve. He hit the dirt, crawled beneath the fire arc, and emerged at the bunker's blind spot. When the nozzle ignited, it was like a solar flare detonating at street level. Flames punched through firing ports, blew out ventilation shafts, and surged into the underground tunnel system like liquid death. Seconds later, smoke burst from 3 separate exits. The ridge trembled. Gunfire ceased, 3 bunkers down. At this point, men stopped mocking his weapon. They stopped whispering that flamethrowers were suicide machines. They stopped waiting for orders. They started following Brill. His presence shifted something primal. Fear became momentum. The island's defenders began to act differently. Japanese machine gun bursts became shorter, sporadic. Men inside caves slammed doors shut at the first hiss of fuel. Some tried to rush out and die charging rather than burn inside. They were choosing bullets over flame. American officers took notice. They redirected entire platoons through paths Brill carved, saving hours, maybe days. A front that had seemed immovable was now collapsing bunker by bunker. Marines started calling him Ashmaker. He didn't acknowledge the nickname. He didn't have time. He still had 46 targets left, and 2 hours to turn a fortified Japanese island into a funeral pyre. By the time Brill reached Bunker 4, the battlefield had already begun to mutate. Marines who hours earlier crawled like hunted animals now moved with a strange confidence, like men advancing behind an invisible wall of terror. Enemy fire patterns shifted. What had been organized volleys turned into panicked bursts. Brill wasn't just killing soldiers, he was collapsing an entire psychological framework. Japanese doctrine was forged around the belief that their bunkers were unassailable, that American infantry would break before Japanese concrete did. But concrete meant nothing when the enemy wasn't trying to breach it, he was incinerating it. Bunker 4 was recessed into a cliff, reinforced with steel rods and packed with sandbags, a miniature fortress meant to stall an entire company. Assaulting it head-on required artillery, engineers, and time the Marines didn't have. Brill didn't pause. He angled around the flank, crawling over shattered coral shards that sliced open his knees. The Japanese inside launched grenades through murder holes, small black cylinders tumbling through the air. One exploded so close that it peppered his mask with shrapnel, cracking the eyepiece. He didn't blink. He ignited. A 6-second burst ripped through the opening. Flames clung to the wooden supports, ran along ceiling beams, and cascaded downward like burning syrup. Ammunition inside the bunker detonated in chain reactions. The structure shuddered, then erupted from the inside out. The blast threw a 6-foot section of the wall outward, landing in the dirt like a tombstone. No one inside survived long enough to understand what hit them. 5, 6, 7. Bunkers fell in rapid succession. Marines stopped counting casualties and started counting seconds. Brill's fuel operator had to sprint to keep up, swapping tanks with mechanical precision. Each M2 refill held around 24 pounds of thickened gasoline, enough to unleash streams of fire at velocities reaching 25 yards per second. The air tasted metallic, saturated with vaporized copper from spent casings and scorched coral dust. Even seasoned infantrymen wiped their eyes as heat waves distorted the landscape, turning the battlefield into a hallucination. But Bunker 8 changed everything. It wasn't just another fortification, it was the anchor of the entire ridge, a command node protected by interlocking fields of fire and trenches leading into a subterranean gallery system. Japanese generals believed it impregnable. American planners expected to bypass it and deal with it later, possibly with naval bombardment. Brill saw it differently. He didn't bypass threats, he erased them. He crawled toward it under a hail of rifle fire. Machine guns opened up from 3 angles. The Japanese had finally understood. If this man fell, the flames died with him. Brill rolled behind a dead tree trunk, its bark charred from earlier fighting. He waited, not for orders, not for backup, just long enough for the guns to reload. Then he moved. His sprint was silent, terrifyingly deliberate. He slid beneath the final rise, planted his boots, and angled the nozzle directly into the vent port. The burst he fired wasn't long, just 4.5 seconds. But it was enough. Flames raced through the tunnel network, turning every twist, every passage, every escape route into a thermal trap. Men screamed. Some ran out, their uniforms on fire, weapons forgotten. Others stayed inside and simply vanished. The ridge seemed to inhale, then exhale black smoke. 8 bunkers gone. But something else was happening now, something bigger than fire. Marines began treating Brill like a moving artillery strike. Officers coordinated their movements around him. Communication lines shifted priority based on his position. When he advanced, units surged. When he paused, the entire front caught its breath. This wasn't support fire anymore. This was a one-man strategic weapon, and the Japanese, who once boasted their defenses could bleed America for months, now faced the unthinkable reality. Their bunkers weren't fighting positions anymore. They were ovens waiting for ignition. By the 9th bunker, a strange pattern emerged. Japanese soldiers weren't holding their positions anymore. They were abandoning fortifications the moment Brill appeared on the horizon, sprinting out in disorganized clusters to die in open ground rather than be consumed in fire. Marines who had been pinned for hours stared in disbelief. They weren't fighting the same enemy anymore. They were chasing men terrified of a single American with a steel backpack. Brill didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He didn't even seem present. His eyes were fixed forward, scanning for the next structure to erase. It was as if the flamethrower had fused with his psyche, turning him into something beyond soldier, an elemental force, a weapon tuned to the frequency of fear. War does that sometimes. It takes men trained to fight and turns them into something the enemy can't categorize. Bullets have rules. Fire does not. The 9th bunker went up fast. So fast that Marines barely realized the fight had started before it was over. Flames shot into the firing slit. A plume of burning fuel fanned across the ceiling. A single ammunition crate detonated, producing a shockwave that rippled outward like thunder. The bunker's roof collapsed inward, suffocating whatever remained. When the smoke cleared, Brill didn't even look at the ruin. He simply signaled for fuel. Bunkers 10 through 20 were a blur, each one reinforced, each one erased. Sometimes he crawled on his stomach, dragging 70 pounds of tank weight across rocks sharp enough to slice boots open. Sometimes he sprinted upright, counting on speed rather than cover. Not once did he fire without certainty. He treated the flamethrower as if it were a scalpel, deadly, precise, unforgiving. Marines started timing him. The fastest bunker took 31 seconds start to finish. The longest? 4 minutes. An entire operational sector, one the Japanese believed would take days to reduce, fell in under 20. Radio chatter from Japanese observers became frantic. Codebreakers later translated intercepted messages. The American demon breathes fire. Our bunkers cannot resist him. We need steel walls, not stone. But steel wouldn't have saved them. Napalm didn't care what material stood in its way. It clung. It crawled. It suffocated oxygen, turning bunkers airtight and lethal, even without flame. Temperature inside a sealed position could spike to over 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to deform equipment, melt rifle receivers, and fuse eyeglass frames into skulls. Marines didn't need to breach the bunkers anymore. Brill simply turned them into cremation chambers. As the 20th bunker fell, something unprecedented happened. A Japanese officer, bleeding, burned, delirious, stumbled toward American lines waving a shredded cloth. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't speak. He simply pointed toward the ridgeline, muttering a single phrase in broken English. "No fire, please no fire." The Marines guarding the perimeter stood frozen. They had never seen a Japanese soldier surrender before engaging. To them, surrender wasn't bravery. It was psychological collapse. Brill's weapon wasn't defeating bodies anymore. It was consuming minds. The destruction continued. Bunker 21 imploded after Brill ignited a fuel pocket inside the ventilation shaft. Bunker 23 saw flames shoot out of 3 separate exits simultaneously, as if the earth itself were venting hell. By Bunker 27, Marines no longer referred to them as enemy strongpoints. They called them targets, because that's all they were now, structures waiting for their turn to vanish. Brill's uniform was soaked with sweat, dirt, and soot. His gloves were cracked. The rubber seals on his tanks hissed from repeated heating. His fuel operator was nearly out of breath. Still, Brill pressed on. He understood something no manual taught. Bullets make enemies cautious. Fire makes them hopeless. And hopeless armies don't fight. They flee. By Bunker 29, even officers who once mocked flamethrowers started whispering the same sentence. We're watching history rewrite itself in real time. They weren't wrong. A battlefield that was supposed to bleed American forces for weeks was disappearing bunker by bunker, flame by flame, and Brill wasn't even halfway done. The sun had climbed high enough to turn Peleliu's coral ridges into white-hot ovens. Marines shielded their eyes as heat shimmered across the battlefield like invisible waves. The island now reeked of scorched earth, molten metal, and something darker, an odor every soldier recognized but never spoke aloud. It was the smell of war pushed beyond the threshold of bullets and steel into something primal, something ancient. Something that reminded men that fire wasn't invented for combat. It was discovered by survival. Brill was no longer advancing in a straight line. His path zigzagged through the unbreakable like a wildfire following wind currents. He didn't look at maps. He didn't wait for reconnaissance. He listened to the sounds of distant clattering machine guns, the muffled echo of footsteps inside tunnels, the tremor in the ground when a bunker door slammed shut. He hunted like he knew the island better than the men who built it. Bunker 30 wasn't visible at first glance. It was disguised beneath a collapsed ridge, accessible only through a trench hidden by brush. Marines had marked this position as low priority, believing it would require explosives and multiple squads to clear. Brill knelt, sniffed the air like a tracker, then pointed toward an almost invisible fissure in the rocks. The escort team exchanged glances. How did he even see that? Brill didn't explain. He lowered himself into the trench, crouched, and ignited. Flames funneled through the crack, like water forced into a pipe. Seconds later, the earth convulsed. The bunker vent exploded like a mortar tube, hurling a geyser of flame into the sky. 30 bunkers down. Marines no longer spoke to Brill. They spoke around him. They planned their routes to support his movement, not the other way around. Engineers laid hoses for fuel. Corpsmen remained nearby but never interfered. And squad leaders treated his tank refills like artillery resupply. War had shifted its center of gravity. It wasn't command posts or terrain features anymore. It was a single Marine with a flamethrower. By Bunker 33, Japanese defenders didn't wait. They sprinted from cover the moment Brill appeared. Some fired wildly, others simply dropped their rifles and ran. One man clawed at the ground so desperately his fingernails tore off. Marines watching the scene didn't cheer. They didn't joke. They just stared, astonished that a soldier burdened with a 70-pound tank could break a culture forged around death. The Japanese command structure began to fracture. Messages intercepted by U.S. intelligence revealed officers begging for reinforcements, not against artillery, not against armor, but against a single American carrying a flamethrower. They confirmed what the battlefield already knew. This wasn't attrition anymore. This was collapse. Bunker 34 resisted longer. Its defenders had sealed the firing port with steel plates, believing they could choke out the flames. Brill didn't attack the slit. He found the air vent, no wider than a fist, and injected fuel directly into it. The bunker became a pressure chamber. When he ignited, the explosion resembled a volcanic burp, short, brutal, final. The steel plates peeled outward like petals. Brill marked the ruin with a nod and moved on. Bunkers 35 to 40 fell so fast, Marines didn't have time to report them. One melted after a burst ignited ammunition, another collapsed when flames fused the coral rock inside, causing the ceiling to detach. Soldiers who once prayed to die with honor now prayed not to die in flame. When Bunker 41 burst open like a kiln vent, a Marine nearby whispered, almost trembling, "He's not clearing positions. He's deleting them." No one disagreed. 42, 43, 44. Each one a lesson in inevitability. Japanese soldiers who stayed died. Those who ran died tired. Nothing slowed him down. By Bunker 48, even the officers who once doubted flamethrowers were arguing over who would get credit for tactical innovation after the war. They understood something history rarely sees. One man had changed an entire doctrine, and he still had one bunker left. The final bunker, number 49, was unlike any Brill had faced before. It wasn't just a strongpoint, it was a fortress. Dug deep into a bend of coral that looked like the jaw of some prehistoric beast, it had triple firing slits, reinforced steel ventilation ducts, and a tunnel system rumored to connect half the ridge. Intelligence believed the Japanese commander himself was inside, along with reserves, ammunition, and enough supplies to withstand a siege for weeks. It was the beating heart of resistance. Remove it, and the island would stop breathing. Marines gathered behind shattered rocks, staring at the structure. Machine guns traced arcs across the landscape, pinning US infantry before they could crawl forward. Mortars dropped sporadic shells, detonating coral shards that sliced skin like knives. No one volunteered to lead the charge. No one except the man with the weapon everyone once mocked. Brill didn't wait for permission. He checked the pressure gauge on his tanks. Full. He snapped the igniter wand into place, secure. He inhaled once, slowly, as though pulling oxygen directly from the chaos around him. Then he moved. Bullets stitched the ground next to him. Shrapnel tore into a palm trunk, showering him with splinters. He didn't even flinch. The flamethrower weighed nearly 70 pounds, yet he ran like the tanks were hollow. Marines watched stunned, not because he was reckless, but because his stride looked inevitable, as if gravity itself had chosen sides. Brill slid into a crater just meters from the bunker's main port. Heat radiated from the concrete. The bunker was alive with movement and gunfire. Inside, the Japanese commander barked orders, convinced the Americans would break. He still believed in concrete. He still believed in walls. Walls mean nothing to fire. Brill rose from the crater, igniter glowing like a miniature sun. He didn't fire, not yet. He approached the ventilation shaft, a narrow steel-lined pipe barely wide enough for a fist. It was angled downward, designed to prevent grenades or debris from being tossed inside. Japanese engineers had prepared for explosives. They had not prepared for napalm. Brill inserted the nozzle, opened the valve, and pressed the trigger. The sound was not explosive. It was predatory. A deep snarling roar as fuel surged down the shaft. He held the stream for 8 full seconds, longer than he'd ever fired. Fuel pooled. Air disappeared. The bunker became a sealed chamber filled with flammable vapor. Then Brill stepped back and tapped the igniter. The result didn't resemble an explosion. It resembled judgment. A shockwave blasted outward, ripping the reinforced doors off their hinges. Flame erupted from every opening simultaneously, like a dragon trapped underground finally finding an exit. The earth shook. Steel plates bent outward. A plume of black smoke punched skyward, twisting into a column visible miles away. Inside, the bunker ceased to exist as a fighting position. Rifles melted, radios fused, bodies charred in place. A command post designed to last weeks had fallen in 42 seconds. Silence followed. A silence so absolute Marines didn't breathe for several seconds. No more gunfire, no more explosions, just wind moving through a battlefield that no longer knew what to resist. Brill stood still, soot-coated, shoulders rising and falling in slow breaths. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't claim victory. He simply watched as the last embers flickered out. 49 bunkers gone. A fortified ridge turned into a scar of ash and molten coral. Then, without ceremony, he whispered something no one ever forgot. "Next time, bring walls that don't burn." History would later record the destruction in cold language, enemy fortifications neutralized, but Marines who witnessed it understood the truth. No doctrine, no empire, no warrior culture survives contact with a man who has mastered fire. And Brill hadn't just mastered it. He weaponized fear itself. When the smoke finally settled over Peleliu, the battlefield didn't look conquered. It looked cauterized. A place engineered to bleed American forces for weeks had fallen in mere hours, not because of overwhelming numbers or superior artillery, but because one man turned a so-called toy store flamethrower into the most decisive instrument of annihilation the island had ever seen. It's easy to romanticize rifles, tanks, and warships, but history isn't written by the loudest weapons. It's written by the ones that change minds, break wills, and redefine what fear means in combat. So here's the truth. Victory in the Pacific wasn't earned solely by battleships, planes, or divisions of infantry. It was earned by every Marine who carried weight no human should bear, every engineer who designed equipment others mocked, every hero who walked forward while others froze. To them, and to the tools they wielded, we owe more than memory. We owe the world they bought in flame.